Hello and welcome to another episode of Why Should I Care About Water Management? I'm Tom Young from STRI.
I'm Charlotte Markey from Polypipe Civils.
And we've got a very special guest today. We've got Sean from Polypipe, who's going to give us some examples of actual water management in real life. We focused on the last episode with Christian Spring on very much the science that we have done in the past as two companies on why and how to make these products work, and how to kind of look at water management from a very much a sports surface point of view. But Sean today is going to go through some nice examples of more kind of urban landscapes of how Polypipe have used their products in these types of situations. So I'll let Sean introduce himself, and we'll get into some of these case studies, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about maybe some of the wider issues these present.
Hi everybody, I'm Sean Robinson. I look after the specification side of business at Polypipe Civils. As Tom said, I've got a couple of case studies here, so happy to chat them through with you. Right, so case study number one, the redevelopment of the Walthamstow Dog racetrack. So Walthamstow Dog racetrack, the aim was to convert the old stadium grounds into a bustling multi-use residential development. Polypipe assisted MLM consulting engineers and Quadrant Construction with the drainage philosophy at planning stage, where the following parameters were set by the Environment Agency and Planning Authority. The project had to account for a 1 in 100 year storm event, plus allowance for climate change, as well as reducing the pre-development runoff by 80%. The site had challenges such as a high water table, contaminated pockets of land, as well as being situated next to a river. These challenges meant that a shallow drainage design was best suited for this development. In the end, a multifunctional approach was adopted, where swales, ponds, and permeable paving incorporating sub-base attenuation were utilised. The demolition and construction started at the same time, which meant that the drainage solutions approved at planning would need to be installed at the right time during the development, so as not to impact the surrounding area and construction of the stadium. To enable the requirements for a high capacity, shallow drainage design, our high strength Permavoid sub-base replacement system was installed beneath the permeable paving areas within the roadways. There was 1,500 cubic metres of attenuation installed to attenuate enough water during those peak storm events, and also to account for the 80% reduction in runoff versus the pre-development rates. The added benefit is that the permeable paving installed above the Permavoid also provided adequate treatment of the runoff before discharging off of site. The shallow nature of the tanks meant that the system could be installed above the high water table and contaminated land, which helped with speed of construction, not having to dewater the site or excavate expensive contaminated waste. The high capacity and high strength nature of the Permavoid system meant that the areas where the tanks were located could be trafficked during the remainder of the construction phase, yet allowing the system to perform within the parameters of the design. The site has now been transformed, incorporating the multifunctional design approach, and here's an example of the site today.
Thanks, Sean. Looking at the site now, just to make it clear in my mind, so the water from the roofs is being transferred down and mainly stored in these large tanks kind of located in that podium car parking area?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can see kind of all the houses on the outside of the development, and then the two banks of houses through the centre, each of those from the roof and the rainwater pipe discharge would connect directly into the side of the Permavoid, again at that shallow nature, as well as receiving water from the permeable paved areas. So the tanks were dealing with both the highways and the roof areas at the same time.
And in terms of those tanks, then how deep did they have to go? Presume they have to be relatively big. That's quite a large area to kind of take all the water from.
No, absolutely. Well, the Permavoid tanks themselves were 300 millimetres high, and then above the tank there was circa 300 millimetres of cover. So we were less than a metre from the cover of the surface. So keeping the tanks very shallow above all of those onerous conditions, but allowing a gravity discharge off of the site there.
Yeah, okay. It's I think we obviously know, working together, there's a lot of parallels there with the sports industry, where we work with excavations obviously at a premium, and we're often dealing with root zones circa 300 to 400 millimeters deep. So it's nice to kind of see the parallels of where this type of technology is used, maybe more conventionally.
Hi, Sean. I've got a question. Obviously, looking at the transformation from that sort of state as it was to this hugely dense new residential scheme, how did you phase the project in terms of construction? Did you have to divide into sub-catchments? What was the logic behind how you worked with the contractors to sort of deliver it from start to finish?
Well, essentially the construction phases were relatively quick. So if I go back to this picture here, you can see the tanks through the design were actually segregated and created into mini areas. So we could work with the contractor rather than having one big tank surrounding the area. We could work with them and install them in sections, phase the deliveries when required, and help with that kind of thing. So the design helped that just as much as working with the contractors on site. So moving on to case study number 2, a slightly different development to that we've just spoke about. So it's the redevelopment of Denby Dale Tennis Club. So this is an existing court that is situated within a redesignated floodplain. It has very poor existing drainage and existing surfacing is almost impermeable, as you can see. Very limited access, and through this process of the redevelopment, there's potential disruption to the local residents associated with kind of vehicle movements and noise. That had to be considered. The area has a history of surface flooding from the adjacent stream, as you can see in the picture. Adding all that together, there was also the challenge to create a playing surface suitable for the club. Robust planning submission focusing on environmental credentials and nuisance avoidance, including limited vehicle movements to site, had to be considered at the same time. As part of the planning, a flood risk assessment demonstrated flood compensation capability from both rainfall and the surcharging from the adjacent river had to be considered. A sustainable drainage and attenuation system was absolutely required. In this scenario, our lightweight, high-strength permavoid system at 85mm depths was installed, which aided the requirements for a lightweight method of construction. No heavy plant was required for the install of this scheme. The system was laid flat to allow both the sustainable drainage and to aid the exacting performance of the criteria required for the tennis court. Here's the finished article, and due to the innovative combination of the systems adopted here, the resurfacing project was subject to a brief from Sport England, who provided funding for this project, and feedback from this project has been excellent.
So you mentioned quite a lot there, Sean, about legislation and kind of really restricting what could be done on sites. Just thinking, is it worth just kind of going over a little bit of what is the current legislation for kind of sites like this and just more generally in terms of water management?
So yeah, so we've been involved in SUDS for many years, over 15 years, particularly looking at kind of deeper attenuation systems. And through our experience, as legislation has become more kind of stringent, we've seen that there aren't many sites nowadays that we see that don't have an attenuation or some requirement of storage in particular. And in our experience over the years, what we're seeing is actually these legislations becoming slightly more stringent in kind of increasing the storm events that are required to compensate for the flood, but the discharge from sites also reducing. So we're seeing actually tanks getting bigger over time. So that's becoming more and more relevant on sites at the moment.
Yeah, okay, and you kind of alluded to it in terms of the future. What do you think future legislation will hold for legislation?
What we're seeing at the moment is, not only dealing with kind of the flood water. I think the planning process will also start putting demands on designs and making the kind of utilising the flood designs to create more multifunctional systems. So adding in more kind of green space, both in the urban and suburban environment. Things like increasing biodiversity, linking back to the net gain approach. So I think we'll actually start to see these requirements become more stringent again moving forward.
Yeah, so we've definitely been involved in that from a golf perspective, where we do a lot of kind of ecological surveys, and but now, yeah, obviously you mentioned the biodiversity net gain, which is I believe that's coming in this year, where all new developments will have to show an increase in 10% in terms of biodiversity. And I guess it is quite nice to be able to start linking SUDS into that biodiversity kind of scheme at the same time.
Absolutely, and we're being asked to do that at the moment. So it's something that we're focusing very hard on at the moment.
Hi, Sean. Just following on from Tom's question, I guess obviously you've done such a range of schemes as we can see. What would you say are the main differences between projects you deal with where they're new development SUDs or retrofit? Because we know, hopefully most of us will know that retrofit's only a kind of requirement for betterment, whereas new development, there's more of an opportunity for planners to bring in more stringent controls. What's your experience of that?
We are involved in both. You know, the majority of the work that we get involved in is new build, but I think as time moves on, and as you said, there's that opportunity with new build to be maybe slightly more creative. But with regards to kind of retrofit, I do think there's opportunity there for us to be able to utilise, you know, these technologies, our partnerships, our approach to actually be as creative in kind of the retrofit environment as well. So as much as you've said, they're looking for betterment, I think we can start to add a bit more multi-functionality to the retrofit approach as well. So I can see us helping in both instances.
So almost redefining betterment with systems like this in a way.
Absolutely.
Right, I think, should we move on? I think you've got a third case study to go through, a bit of a left field one.
Yeah, so moving on to case study number 3, what we're demonstrating here is going back to the London 2012 Olympics, whereby this was kind of Polypipe's very kind of early involvement in the Permavoid relationship, where we first started to kind of look at bringing on the license. And with the existing distributors during that time, very much worked closely with the developers on this site to deliver this approach. And this, as you can see, where the project is located, there was many challenges associated with delivering this development, and everybody worked very closely together to deliver a very successful event. So on this project, to give you an idea of kind of what challenges were associated with it, so 0 excavations were allowed within the park. I don't know whether you've ever been to Greenwich Park, but you'll know that the gradients vary significantly, from 6 to 1% across the whole development. There were numerous protected trees in and around the area, which had to be protected during the event. Believe it or not, in this kind of area, water management systems had to comply with best practice. So on the arena itself, the performance and training services had to manage a 1 in 100 year storm, plus 5% for climate change, with 0 discharge to the sewer system. So it had to be self-maintaining. Piped water supply for irrigation of the performance services was limited, so they had to reuse the rainwater that was on the development. So a rainwater harvesting system was adopted. And as you can appreciate, with the kind of surrounding area, truck cycles and deliveries had to be kept to a minimum, essentially. And then after the event, the entire platform structures had to be deconstructed and taken away off-site. And the Permavoid in this instance that was utilised for the deck, the main deck, as to where the arena was, and the surrounding areas was reused. So it was a great benefit of the system there for use in this type of application, but then taking it through for use in construction applications. In the picture here, just demonstrating how they approached the design, and essentially in areas where the training areas were on a sloped application, the Permavoid was stepped as you went down the gradient to create that level platform at the top. A really clever and ingenious idea. And the picture here is just a demonstration of that rainwater harvesting system. So anything that was kept on the surface, and kind of limited experience for myself, but the surface had to maintain a certain requirement of moisture content to meet the exacting requirements for the equestrian approach in that event. So any rainwater that landed on the deck, or any excess rainwater that landed on the deck, was fed down into tanks beneath the deck and could be fed back when required. And here's the finished article. I was fortunate enough to go down there during the construction and saw that the project well underway, and it was a really good project to see and witness. So hopefully that explains a little bit more about the kind of versatility of some of the projects that you can use and get involved with regards to water management.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. We've got our last episode is going to be of England hockey, where we're looking at a similar kind of system that was put into the Stoop last year. So I think there's a lot of parallels between the two of them. But even for me, seeing I knew about that project, but just seeing the pictures, I didn't quite appreciate, you know, how big the actual arena was. From the air, it doesn't look too big, but it's a huge area, I guess. And some serious amount of water management that needs going on for that entire area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the equestrian arena itself was kind of self-maintaining, but you know, kind of at the top of Greenwich Park, there were numerous kind of training areas that all had a similar system installed. So you can imagine, you know, the logistics and the amount of product that had to be used to kind of to deliver that project.
So you've talked about temporary applications and the reuse of the permavoid system afterwards. So do you see a future where there's a sort of new model where we can actually do temporary applications and almost lease the system to people when they need these on-the-spot solutions for temporary events, sort of multifunctional stadia approaches where there might be a couple of seasons where they might need it and then maybe need to reuse it later down the line? What is there a sort of model to explore there?
I absolutely think there is, and it's something we have looked into, and it's something that we'd like to progress. So bringing kind of sports to kind of more urban areas where there's limited access, absolutely, we can explore that with people who want to kind of to go through it. But I also see a kind of a benefit as we move into kind of life post-COVID in creating kind of areas in city centres. That require those, a restaurant, for example, might have to overspill out into a street area, and essentially, you can use these as platforms to kind of create a more open social distancing area. So I think we can take it from sport through to kind of, the social requirements of the new world we're about to embark on, essentially. So I think there's absolute benefit for both.
I was just going to say, I think it's quite interesting as well, the legislation-wise, kind of going back to our previous kind of example, where the legislation, even as the temporary works, is still just as kind of strict.
Absolutely.
I was going to say probably local authorities will really benefit from this, as Sean was saying, post-COVID, to almost think about temporary solutions. For example, even maybe temporary cycleways. We've seen quite a lot of that coming up recently. So do you see there being an application for temporary sort of changes to transport infrastructure in towns and cities?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it already, and it really depends on kind of the local area and what's available. If you've got the room to do it, I think they'll do it without kind of much disruption to the local area. But if they do need to kind of, like as you say, position a cycle path, maybe through a park or something that that is that does need an element of construction to it, then I think absolutely we can utilise this technology for those applications.
Yeah, good. I think we'll probably touch upon some of them in some of our later episodes as well. Where essentially the world's your oyster, really. Anything is related to water management, and that's hopefully some of the themes we're trying to put across in here, is that basically everything involves water at some point in terms of development. So you might as well kind of use it to your advantage rather than fighting against it. So exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think we'll leave it there in the interest of time. We're trying to keep these as short and sweet as possible. So thanks again, Sean. Really interesting, and some really great case studies there. So we'll hopefully see you again for another episode next week, where we'll be discussing some of the more sport-related applications of sustainable urban drainage. So we'll see you next week. Bye from me.
Bye from me.
Bye.